Chapter 17. Diplomacy is the delicate weapon of the civilized warrior. Hun. Attila the. We waited patiently for our war council. The two of us, Aahz and me, against an army. This was, of course, Aahz's idea. Left to my own devices, I wouldn't be caught dead in this position. Trying to ignore that unfortunate choice of words, I cleared my throat and spoke to Aahz out of the corner of my mouth. Aahz? Yeah, kid. How long are we going to stand here? Until they notice us and do something about it. Terrific. Either we'd rot where we stood, or someone would shoot us full of arrows. We were standing about 20 yards from one of the encampments, with nothing between us and them but meadow. We could see clearly the bustle of activity within the encampment, and in theory, there was nothing keeping them from seeing us. This is why we were standing where we were, to draw attention to ourselves. Unfortunately, so far no one had noticed. It had been decided that Aahz and I would work alone on this first sortie to hide the true strength of our force. It occurred to me that it also hid the true weakness of our force, but I felt it would be tactless to point this out. At first, Brockhurst had argued in favor of his coming along with me instead of Aahz, claiming that as an imp he had much more experience at bargaining than a demon. It was pointed out to him rather forcefully by Aahz that in this instance we weren't bargaining for glass beads or whoopee cushions, but for a war. And if the imp wanted to prove to Aahz that he knew more about fighting... Needless to say, Brockhurst backed down at that point. This was good, as it saved me from having to openly reject his offer. I mean, I may not be the fastest learner around, but I could still distinctly remember Aahz getting the best of Brockhurst the last time the two of them had squared off for a bargaining session. Besides, if this meeting went awry, I wanted my mentor close at hand to share the consequences with me. So, here we stood, blatantly exposed to the enemy without even a sword for our defense. That was another of Aahz's brainstorms. He argued that our being unarmed accomplished three things. First, it showed that we were here to talk, not to fight. Second, it demonstrated our faith in my magical abilities to defend us. Third, it encouraged our enemy to meet us similarly unarmed. He also pointed out that Ajax would be hiding in the tree line behind us, with strung bow and cocked arrow, and would probably be better at defending us if anything went wrong than a couple of swords would. He was right, of course, but it did nothing to settle my nerves as we waited. "Heads up, kid," Aahz murmured. "We've got company." Sure enough, a rather stocky individual was striding briskly across the meadow in our direction. "Kid," Aahz hissed suddenly, "your disguise." "What about it?" I whispered back. "It isn't," came the reply. He was right. I had carefully restored his dubious character appearance, but had forgotten completely about changing my own. Having our motley crew accept my leadership in my normal form had caused me to overlook the fact that clods are harder to impress than demons. "Should I began. "Too late," Aahz growled. "Fake it." The soldier was almost upon us now, close enough for me to notice when he abandoned his bored expression and forced a smile. "I'm sorry, folks," he called with practiced authority. "You'll have to clear the area. We'll be moving soon and you're blocking the path." "Call your duty officer," Aahz boomed back at him. "My who?" The soldier scowled. "Duty officer. Officer of the day, commander, whatever you call whoever's currently in charge of your formation," Aahz clarified. "Somebody's got to be running things, and if you're officer material, I'm the Queen of the May." Whether or not the soldier understood Aahz's allusion, I didn't. He caught the general implication, Yeah, there's someone in charge, he snarled, his complexion darkening slightly. He's a very busy man right now. Too busy to stand around talking to civilians. We're getting ready to move our troops, mister, so take your son and get out of the way. If you want to watch the soldiers, you'll have to follow along and watch us when we camp tonight. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I said, in a surprisingly soft voice. I don't care who your father is, Sonny, the soldier retorted. We're trying to... The name's not Sonny, it's Skeeve, I hissed, drawing myself up. Court magician to the kingdom of Possiltum, pledged to that kingdom's defense. Now I advise you to call your officer. Or do you want to wake up tomorrow morning on a lily pad? The soldier recoiled a step and stood regarding me suspiciously. Is he for real? He asked Aahz skeptically. How's your taste for flies? Aahz smiled. You mean he can really? Look, interrupted Aahz. I'm not playing servant to the kid because of his terrific personality, if you know what I mean. I see. The soldier was cautiously backing toward the encampment. I'll bring my commanding officer. We'll be here, Aahz assured him. The soldier nodded and retreated with noticeably greater speed than he had displayed approaching us. So far so good, my mentor said with a grin. What's wrong with my personality? I asked bluntly. Aahz sighed. Later, kid. For the time being, concentrate on looking aloof and dignified, okay? Okay or not, there wasn't much else to do while we waited for the officer to put in his appearance. Apparently, news of our presence spread through the encampment in record time, for a crowd of soldiers gathered at the edge of the camp long before we saw any sign of the officer. It seemed all preparations to move were suspended, at least temporarily, while the soldiers lined up and craned their necks to gawk at us. It was kind of a nice feeling to have caused such a sensation, until I noticed several soldiers were taking time to strap on weapons and armor before joining the crowd. Aahz, I whispered. Yeah, kid? I thought this was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. It is, he assured me. But they're arming, I pointed out. Relax, kid, he whispered back. Remember, Ajax is covering us. I tried to focus on that thought. Then I saw what was apparently the officer approaching us, flanked by two soldiers, and I focused on the swords they were all wearing. Aahz, I hissed. Relax, kid, Aahz advised me. Remember Ajax. I remembered. I also remembered we were vastly outnumbered. I understand you gentlemen are emissaries of Possiltum? The officer asked, coming to a halt in front of us. I nodded stiffly, hoping the abruptness of my motion would be interpreted as annoyance rather than fear. Fine, the officer smirked. Then as the first representative of the Empire to contact a representative of Possiltum, I have the pleasure of formally declaring war on your kingdom. What is your name? Aahz asked casually. Claude, the officer responded. Why do you ask? The historians like details, Aahz shrugged. Well, Claude, as the first representative of Possiltum to meet with a representative of your empire in times of war, it is our pleasure to demand your unconditional surrender. That got a smile out of the officer. Surrender, he chortled. To a cripple and a child? You must be mad. Even if I had the authority to do such a thing, I wouldn't. That's right. Aahz shook his head in mock self-admonishment. We should have realized. Someone in charge of a supply company wouldn't swing much weight in an army like this, would he? We had chosen this particular group of soldiers to approach specifically because they were a supply unit. That meant they were lightly armed and hopefully not an elite fighting group. Aahz's barb struck home, however. The officer stopped smiling and dropped his hand to his sword hilt. I found myself thinking again of Ajax's protection. "I have more than enough authority to deal with you two," he hissed. "Authority, maybe," I yawned. "But I frankly doubt you have the power to stand against us." As I mentioned, I did not feel as confident as I sounded. The officer's honor guard had mimicked his action, so that now all three of our adversaries were standing ready to draw their swords. "Very well," Claude snarled. "You've been warned. Now we're going to bring our wagons across this spot, and if you're on it when we get here, you've no one to blame but yourselves." "Accepted," Aahz leered. "Shall we say noon tomorrow?" "Tomorrow?" the officer scowled. "What's wrong with right now?" "Come on, Claude," Aahz admonished. "We're talking about the first engagement of a new campaign. Surely you want some time to plan your tactics." "Tactics?" Claude echoed thoughtfully. "And to pass the word to your superiors that you're leading the opening gambit," Aahz continued casually. The officer murmured. "And to summon reinforcements," I supplied. "Unless, of course, you want to keep all the glory for yourself." "Glory?" That did it. Claude pounced on the word like a Deville on a gold piece. Aahz had been right in assuming supply officers don't see combat often. I don't believe we'll require reinforcements," he murmured cagily. "Are you sure?" Aahz sneered. "The odds are only about 100 to 1 in your favor." "But he is a magician," Claude smiled. "A good officer can't be too careful. Still, it would be pointless to involve too many officers, soldiers, in a minor skirmish." "Claude," Aahz said with grudging admiration, "I can see yours is a military mind without equal. Win or lose, I look forward to having you as an opponent." "And you, sir," the officer returned with equal formality. "Shall we say noon, then?" "We'll be here," Aahz nodded. With that, the officer turned and strode briskly back to his encampment, his bodyguard trudging dutifully beside him. Our comrades were bristling with questions when we re-entered the tree line. "Is it set, boss?" Brockhurst asked. "Any trouble?" Tanda pressed. "Piece of cake," Aahz bragged. "Right, kid?" "Well," I began modestly. I was a little worried when they started to reach for their swords. I would have been terrified if I didn't know Ajax was... Say, where is Ajax?
"He's up in that clump of bushes,"
Gus informed me, jerking a massive thumb at a thicket of greenery on the edge of the tree line.
"He should be back by now."
When we found Ajax, he was fast asleep, curled around his bow. We had to shake him several times to wake him. Chapter 18. Just before the battle, Mother, I was thinking most of you. Sonny Barker. A long, slimy tongue assaulted me from the darkness, accompanied by a blast of bad breath which could have only one source.
"Gleep!"
I started to automatically cuff the dragon away, then had a sudden change of heart. "Hi, fella," I smiled, scratching his ear. "Lonely?" In response, my pet flopped on his side with a thud that shook the ground. His serpentine neck was long enough that he managed to perform this maneuver without moving his head from my grasp. His loyal affection brought a smile to my face, for the first time since I had taken up my lonely vigil. It was a welcome antidote to my nervous insomnia. I was leaning against a tree, watching the pinpoints of light that marked the enemy's encampment. Even though the day's events had left me exhausted, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind awash with fears and anticipation of tomorrow's clash. Not wishing to draw attention to my discomfort, I had crept to this place to be alone. As stealthy as I had attempted to be, however, apparently Gleep had noted my movement and come to keep me company. "Oh, Gleep," I whispered. "What are we going to do?" For his answer, he snuggled closer against me and laid his head in my lap for additional patting. He seemed to have unshakable faith in my ability to handle any crisis as it arose. I wished with all my heart I shared his confidence. "Skeeve?" came a soft voice from my right. I turned my head and found Tonda standing close beside me. The disquieting thing about having an assassin for a friend is that they move so silently. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" "Sure, Tonda," I said, patting the ground next to me. "Have a seat." Instead of sitting at the indicated spot, she sank to the ground where she stood and curled her legs up under her. "It's about Ajax," she began hesitantly. "I hate to bother you, but I'm worried about him." "What's wrong?" I asked. "Well, the team's been riding him about falling asleep today when he was supposed to be covering you," she explained. "He's taking it pretty hard." "I wasn't too wild about it myself," I commented bitterly. "It's a bad feeling to realize that we really were alone out there. If anything had gone wrong, we would have been cut to shreds while placidly waiting for our expert bowman to intercede." "I know." Tonda's voice was almost too soft to be heard. "And I don't blame you for feeling like that. In a way, I blame myself." "Yourself?" I blinked. "Why?" "I vouched for him, Skeeve," she whispered. "Don't you remember?" "Well, sure," I admitted. "But you couldn't have known—" "But I should have," she interrupted bitterly. "I should have realized how old he is now. He shouldn't be here, Skeeve. That's why I wanted to talk to you about doing something." "Me?" I asked, genuinely startled. "What do you want me to do?" "Send him back," Tonda urged. "It isn't fair to you to endanger your mission because of him, and it isn't fair to Ajax to put him in a spot like this." "That isn't what I meant," I murmured, shaking my head. "I meant, why are you talking to me? Aahz is the one you have to convince." "That's where you're wrong, Skeeve," she corrected. "Aahz isn't leading this group. You are." "Because of what he said back on Diva?" I smiled. "Come on, Tonda. You know Aahz. He was just a little miffed. You notice he's called all the shots so far." The moonlight glistened in Tonda's hair as she shook her head. "I do know Aahz, Skeeve. Better than you do," she said. "He's a stickler for chain of command. If he says you're the leader, you're the leader." "But besides," she continued over my protest, "Aahz is only one member of the team. What's important is all the others are counting on you too. On you, not on Aahz. You hired him, and as far as they're concerned, you're the boss." The frightening thing was, she was right. I hadn't really stopped to think about it, but everything she said was true. I had just been too busy with my own worries to reflect on it. Now that I realized the full extent of my responsibilities, a new wave of doubts assaulted me. I wasn't even that sure of myself as a magician and as a leader of men. "I'll have to think about it," I stalled. "You don't have much time," she pointed out. "You've got a war scheduled to start tomorrow." There was a crackling in the brush to our left, interrupting our conversation. "Boss," came Brockhurst's soft hail. "Are you busy?" "Sort of," I called back. "Well, this will only take a minute." Before I could reply, two shadows detached themselves from the brush and drew closer. One was Brockhurst, the other was Gus. I should have known from the noise that the gargoyle was accompanying Brockhurst. Like Tonda, the imp could move like a ghost. "We were just talking about Ajax," Brockhurst informed me, squatting down to join our conference. The gargoyle followed suit.
"Yeah,"
Gus confirmed.
"The three of us wanted to make a suggestion to you."
"Right," Brockhurst nodded. "Gus and me and the gremlin." "The gremlin?" I asked. The imp craned his neck to peer around him. "He must have stayed back at camp," he shrugged. "About Ajax?" Tonda prompted.
"We think you should pull him from the team," Gus announced. "Send him back to Diva and out of the line of fire."
"It's not for us," Brockhurst hastened to clarify. "It's for him. He's a nice old guy, and we'd hate to see anything happen to him." "He is pretty old," I murmured.
"Old?" Gus exclaimed. "Boss, the gremlin says he's tailed him for over 200 years. 200! According to him, Ajax was old when their paths first crossed. It won't kill him to miss this one war, but it might kill him to fight in it." "Why is the gremlin tailing him anyway?" I asked.
"I've told you before, kid," a voice boomed in my ear. "Gremlins don't exist."
With that pronouncement, Aahz sank down at my side, between me and Tonda. As I attempted to restore my heartbeat to normal, it occurred to me I knew an awful lot of light-footed people. "Hi, Aahz," I said, forcing a smile. "We were just talking about—"
"I know, I heard," Aahz interrupted. "And for a change, I agree."
"You do?" I blinked.
"Sure," he yawned. "It's a clear-cut breach of contract. He hired out his services as a bowman, and the first assignment you give him, he literally lies down on the job."
Actually, it had been the second assignment. I had a sudden flash recollection of Ajax drawing and firing in a smooth, fluid motion, cutting down a signal standard so distant it was barely visible.
"My advice would be to send him back," Aahz was saying. "If you want to soothe your conscience, give him partial payment and a good recommendation. But the way he is, he's no good to anybody."
Perhaps it was because of Tonda's lecture, but I was suddenly aware that Aahz had specifically stated his suggestion as advice, not an order. "Heads up, boss," Brockhurst murmured. "We've got company." Following his gaze, I saw Ajax stumbling toward us, his ghost-like paleness flickering in the darkness like a ghost. It occurred to me that what had started out as a moment of solitude was becoming awfully crowded.
"Evening, youngster," he saluted. "Didn't mean to interrupt nothing. Didn't know you folks was having a meeting."
We were just talking," I explained, suddenly embarrassed.
"I can guess about what, too," Ajax sighed. "Well, I was going to do this private-like, but I suppose the rest of you might as well hear it, too."
"Do what, Ajax?" I asked.
"Resign," he said. "Seems to me to be the only decent thing to do after what happened today."
"It could have happened to anyone," I shrugged.
"Nice of you to say so, youngster," Ajax smiled. "But I can see the handwriting on the wall. I'm just too old to be any good to anybody anymore. 'Bout time I admitted it to myself."
I found myself noticing the droop in his shoulders and a listlessness that hadn't been there when we first met on Diva.
Don't fret about paying me, Ajax continued. I didn't do nothing, so I figure you don't owe me nothing. If somebody'll just blip me back to Diva, I'll get out of your way and let you fight your war the way it should be fought. Well, Ajax, Aahz sighed, rising to his feet and extending his hand, we're gonna miss you. Just a minute, I found myself saying in a cold voice. Are you trying to tell me you're breaking our contract? Ajax's head came up with a snap. I expected better from a genuine archer, I concluded. I wouldn't call it a breach of contract, youngster, the old bowman corrected me carefully. More like a termination by mutual consent. I'm just too old, I interrupted. I knew you were old when I hired you. I knew you were old when I planned my strategy for tomorrow's fight around that bow of yours. I knew you were old, Ajax, but I didn't know you were a coward. There was a sharp intake of breath somewhere nearby, but I didn't see who it was. My attention was focused on Ajax. It was no longer a defeated, drooping old man, but a proud, angry warrior who loomed suddenly over me. Sonny, he growled, I know I'm old, 'cause in my younger days I would have killed you for saying that. I never ran from a fight in my life, and I never broke a contract. If you got some shooting for me to do tomorrow, I'll do it. Then maybe you'll see what having a genuine archer on your side is all about. With that, he spun on his heel and stalked off into the darkness. It had been a calculated risk, but I still found I was covered with cold sweat from facing the old man's anger. I also realized the rest of the group was staring at me in silent expectation. I suppose you're all wondering why I did that, I said, smiling. I had hoped for a response, but the silence continued. I appreciate all your advice, and hope you continue to give it in the future, but I'm leading this force, and the final decisions have to be mine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Aahz cock his eyebrow, but I ignored him. Everyone, including Ajax, said if I let him go, if I sent him back to Diva, there would be no harm done. I disagree. It would have taken away the one thing the years have left untouched, his pride. It would have confirmed to him his worst fears, that he's become a useless old man. I scanned my audience. Not one of them could meet my eye. So he might get killed. So what? He's accepted that risk in every war he's fought in. I'd rather order him into a fight knowing for certain he'd be killed than condemn him to a living death as a washed-up has-been. This way he has a chance, and as his employer, I feel I owe him that chance. I paused for breath. They were looking at me again, hanging on my next words. One more thing, I snarled. I don't want to hear any more talk about him being useless. That old man still handles a bow better than anyone I've ever seen. If I can't find a way to use him effectively, then it's my fault as a tactician, not his. I've got my shortcomings, but I'm not going to blame them on Ajax any more than I'd blame them on any of you. Silence reigned again, but I didn't care. I had spoken my piece, and felt no compulsion to blather on aimlessly just to fill the void. Well, boss, Brockhurst cleared his throat, getting to his feet. I think I'll turn in now.
Me too,
echoed Gus, also rising. Just one thing. The imp paused and met my gaze squarely. For the record, it's a real pleasure working for you. The gargoyle nodded his agreement, and the two of them faded into the brush. There was a soft kiss on my cheek, but by the time I turned my head, Tanda had disappeared. You know, kid, Aahz said, You're gonna make a pretty good leader someday.
Thanks, Aahz, I blinked.
If you live that long, my mentor concluded.
We sat side by side in silence for a while longer. Gleep had apparently dozed off, for he was snoring softly as I continued petting him.
If it isn't prying, Aahz asked finally, what is this master plan you have for tomorrow that's built around Ajax?
I sighed and closed my eyes. I haven't got one, I admitted. I was kinda hoping you'd have a few ideas.
I was afraid you were gonna say that, Aahz grumbled.
Chapter 19. What if they gave a war and only one side came? Lucifer.
Wake up, kid!
I returned to consciousness as I was being forcefully propelled sideways along the forest floor, presumably assisted by the ready toe of my mentor. After I had slid to a stop, I exerted most of my energy and raised my head. Aahz, I announced solemnly, as leader of this team, I have reached another decision. In the future, I want Tanda to wake me up.
Not a chance, Aahz leered. She's off scouting our right flank. It's me or the dragon.
Great choice. I suddenly realized how bright it was. Hey, I blinked. How late is it?
Figure we've got about a minute before things start popping, Aahz said casually.
How long? I gasped. Aahz's brow furrowed for a moment as he reflected on his words. Cloddish units of time still gave him a bit of trouble.
An hour, he smiled triumphantly. That's it, an hour.
That's better, I sighed, sinking back to a horizontal position.
On your feet, kid, Aahz ordered. We let you sleep as late as we could, but now you're needed to review the troops.
Have you briefed everybody? I yawned, sitting up. Is the plan clear?
As clear as it's gonna be, all things considered, Aahz shrugged.
Okay, I responded, rolling to my feet. Let's go. You can fill me in on any new developments along the way. Aahz and I had been up most of the night formulating today's plan, and I found I was actually eager to see it implemented.
You should be thankful you weren't on the other side, Aahz chortled as we moved to join the others. Old Claude's been making the most of the time we gave him.
Keeping them busy, is he? I smiled.
Since sunup, Aahz confirmed smugly. Drilling, sharpening swords, never a dull moment in the Empire's army, that's for sure.
I wasn't sure I shared Aahz's enthusiasm for the enemies spending lots of time sharpening their swords. Fortunately, I was spared the discomfort of replying as Gus lumbered up to us.
You just missed Brockhurst's report, he informed us. Still nothing on the left flank.
Wouldn't we be able to tell from their signals if they were moving up additional support? I asked.
If you believe their signals, Aahz countered. It wouldn't be the first time an army figured out the enemy had broken their code and started sending misleading messages.
Oh, I said wisely.
Speaking of signals, Aahz said with a grin, you know the messages they were sending yesterday? The ones that went encountered minor resistance?
I remember, I nodded.
Well, it seems Claude has decided he needs to up the ante if he's going to get a promotion out of this. Overnight, we've become armed opposition must be subdued forcefully. Neat, huh?
I swallowed hard. Does that mean they'll be moving in reinforcements? I asked, trying to sound casual.
Not a chance, kid, Aahz winked. Claude there has turned down every offer of assistance that came down the line. He keeps insisting he can handle it with the company he's commanding.
I'd say he's got his neck way, way out, Gus commented.
And we're just the ones to chop it off for him, Aahz finished.
Where's Ajax? I asked, changing the subject.
Down at the forest line picking out his firing point, Gus replied. Don't worry, boss. He's awake.
Actually, that wasn't my worry concerning Ajax at all. In my mind's eye, I could still see his angry stance when I called him a coward the night before.
"Morning, youngster," the bowman hailed, emerging from the bush. "Think I got us a place all picked out."
"Hi, Ajax," I replied. "Say, when you get a minute, I'd like to talk to you about last night."
"Think nothing of it," Ajax assured me with a grin. "I've plumb forgot about it already."
There was a glint in his eye that contradicted his words, but if he was willing to pretend nothing had happened, I'd go along with it for now.
"I hate to interrupt," Aahz interrupted, "but I think friend Claude's just about ready to make his move."
Sure enough, the distant encampment was lining up in a marching formation. The hand-drawn wagons were packed and aligned, with the escort troops arrayed to the front and sides. The signal tower, despite its appearance, was apparently also portable, and was being pushed along at the rear of the formation by several sweating soldiers.
"Late," Ajax sneered. "I tell you, youngster, armies are the same in any dimension." "Okay, kid," Aahz said briskly. "Do your stuff. It's about time we got into position."
I nodded and closed my eyes for concentration. With a few strokes of my mental paintbrush, I altered Gus's features until the gargoyle was the mirror image of myself.
"Pretty good," Ajax commented critically, looking from Gus to me and back again.
I repeated the process, returning Aahz to his dubious character disguise.
"Well, we're off," Aahz waved. "Confusion to the enemy."
Today's plan called for Gus substituting for me. The logic was that should anything go wrong, his stone flesh would not only keep him from harm, but also serve as a shield to defend Aahz. Somehow, it didn't seem right to me to remain behind in relative safety while sending someone else to take my risks for me. It occurred to me that perhaps I had called the wrong person coward last night when speaking with Ajax. The bowman seemed to accept the arrangement without question, however.
"Follow me, youngster," he cackled. "I don't want to miss any of this."
With that, he turned and plunged into the brush, leaving me little choice but to trail along behind. Fortunately, Ajax's chosen vantage point wasn't far. Old or not, I found he set a wicked pace. Stringing his bow, he crouched and waited, chuckling softly in anticipation. Settling in beside him, I took a moment to check the energy lines, the invisible streams of energy magicians draw their power from. There were 2 strong lines nearby, one air, one ground, which was good. While Aahz had taught me how to store the energies internally, with the amount of action scheduled for the day, I wanted all the power I could get. We could see Aahz and Gus striding with great dignity toward the selected combat point. The opposing force watched them in frozen silence as they took their places. For a moment, everyone stood in tableau. Then, Claude turned to his force and barked out an order. Immediately, a half-dozen archers broke from the formation and fanned out on either side of the wagons. Moving with slow deliberation, they each drew and cocked an arrow, then leveled the bows at the 2 figures blocking the company's progress. I concentrated my energies. Claude shouted something at our comrades. They remained motionless. I concentrated. The bowmen loosed their missiles. Gus threw up one hand dramatically. The arrows stopped in mid-air and fell to the ground. The bowmen looked at each other in amazement. Claude barked another order at them. They shakily drew and fired another barrage. This one was more ragged than the first, but I managed to stop it as well.
"Nice work, youngster," Ajax exclaimed gleefully. "That's got 'em going."
Sure enough, the neat ranks of soldiers were rippling as the men muttered back and forth among themselves. Claude noted it too, and ordered his bowmen back into the ranks. Round 1 to us. My elation was short-lived, though. The soldiers were drawing their swords now. The two groups assigned to guarding the sides of the wagon pivoted forward, forming two wings ready to engulf our teammates. As further evidence of Claude's nervousness, he even had the troops assigned to pulling the wagons leave their posts and move up to reinforce the center of his line. That's what we were waiting for. "Now, Ajax," I hissed. "Arch 'em high."
"I remember, youngster," the archer grinned. "I'm ready when you are."
I waited until he raised his bow, then concentrated an intense beam of energy at a point a few inches in front of his bow. It was like the candle-lighting exercise, and it worked as well now as it had when we tried it last night. As each shaft sped from Ajax's bow, it burst into flames and continued on its flight. Again and again, with incredible speed, the bowman sent his missiles hissing through my ignition point. It required all my concentration to maintain the necessary stream of energy, moving it occasionally as his point of aim changed. Finally, he dropped his bow back to his side.
"That ought to do it, youngster," he grinned. "Take a look."
I did. There in the distance, behind the soldiers' lines, thin plumes of smoke were rising from the wagons. In a few moments, Claude's supply company would be without supplies. If we had a few moments. As we watched, the men began to advance on Aahz and Gus, their swords gleaming in the sun.
"Think we'd better do something about that," Ajax muttered, raising his bow again.
"Wait a second, Ajax," I ordered, squinting at the distant figures. There had been a brief consultation between Aahz and Gus. Then the gargoyle stepped back and began gesturing wildly at his companion. It took me a moment, but I finally got the message. With a smile, I closed my eyes and removed Aahz's disguise. Pandemonium reigned. The soldiers in the front ranks took one look at the demon opposing them and stampeded for the rear, half trampling the men behind them. As word spread through the formation, it became a rout, though I seriously doubt those in the rear knew what they were running from. If anyone noticed the burning wagons, they didn't slow once.
"Hoo-wee!" Ajax exclaimed, thumping me on the back. "That did it! Look at 'em run! You think those fellas never seed a pervert before."
"They probably haven't," I commented, trying to massage some feeling back into my shoulder.
"You know," the bowman drawled, squinting at the scene below, "I got me an idea. Them fellas ran off so fast they forgot to signal to anybody. Think we should do it for 'em?"
"How?" I asked.
"Well," he grinned, "I know the signals and you're a magician. If I told you what signal to run up, could you do it? Without anybody holding it?"
"Sure could," I agreed. "What'll we need for the signal?"
"Let me think," he frowned. "We'll have to get a skull, and a couple of pieces of red cloth, and a black ball, and—"
"Wait a minute, Ajax," I said, holding up a hand. "I think there's an easier signal they'll understand. Watch this." I sent one more blast of energy out, and the tower platform burst into flames. "Think they'll get the message?" I smiled. Ajax stared at the burning tower for a moment.
"You're pretty good at that, youngster," he murmured finally. "Throwing fire that far." Well, I began modestly, we magicians can— "Course," he continued, "if you can do that, then you didn't really need me and Blackie to handle those wagons, did you?" Too late, I realized my mistake. "Ajax, kinda strange, you going to all that trouble, just to convince me I'm not useless." "You're not useless," I barked. "Just because sometimes you're not necessary doesn't mean you're useless. I may be young, but I'm old enough to know that." Ajax regarded me for a moment, then he suddenly smiled. "Danged if you aren't right, youngst— Skeeve." He laughed. "Guess I knew it, but plumb forgot it there for a while. Let's go get some wine from that cask strapped to your dragon. I'd like to thank you proper for reminding me." We headed back to camp together.